say that we're all good, and then I'll make a good and proper introduction. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Janet's Planet. I am so delighted to announce to you all that we have the wonderful Herb Baker here. He is in NASA's Hall of Honor. He both has been on camera, he's an actor, but he also worked for NASA for a really awesome time, and he's going to tell us all about this. And so I want you, let's be writing down your questions, because he's going to be sharing a lot of really great stuff with us. Write down any questions you have, and then once he kind of shares, we'll be asking those questions. If you're out there watching this online, we'll be trying to moderate those questions as well. But Herb, thank you so much for being here this morning for these kiddos.
You're welcome. I love talking about NASA, as you might know.
I do know. I've seen you many times with Space Hipsters. I'm going to spotlight your video, sir. Again, we've got kids from all over the country and the world. We've got guests from India and South Africa. So you have a global audience this morning, good sir. But tell them about, before I tell them about you, I want you to tell them about you, because I'm sure you do it better than I.
Okay, well, so space has pretty much been my whole life. I feel really lucky. My parents happened to move to a place where just a couple of years later, they built the Johnson Space Center. And so when they picked the first 7 astronauts and then the additional astronaut classes after that, they all moved to my community to go to work at NASA and train. And so their kids were my classmates and friends in middle school and in high school and still today I'm friends with a lot of the astronauts kids. And of course with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, I still see and hear and talk with them, a lot, 50 years later. So anyway, all of that to say that since about as long as I can remember, since middle school, literally, space has been a big part of my life. And so one thing I can say, maybe you were going to mention this anyway, most people assume, since I worked for NASA for so long, that I was an engineer or scientist or doctor, but I was a business guy. I worked in the contract management office. A lot of people don't realize that about 80% of NASA's budget goes to contracts, to Lockheed and Boeing and SpaceX, and NASA buys a lot of most of the things that they use and fly, and about 5 times as many people work for NASA contractors supporting NASA as there are NASA employees. So I was one of the, not few, but there were a few, a fair amount of us. But again, I was one of the people who was not a scientist or an engineer or a doctor. But that just goes to show that any of you out there who love space and space travel and space exploration and want to work for NASA or ESA or some other space agency, they definitely need STEM, engineering, science, math people, but they also need other people, to do business and accounting and finance and human relations.
But didn't I read, weren't you also a news anchor? Were you covering some of those early stories? So you're combining journalism, you're acting, you're on-camera persona, you do live theater. I mean, guys, what I love about Herb is that he really is, like, I feel like you're a person after my own heart. It's like my undergrad's in music and theater, but yet I love space, and here we are communicating this thing. So you actually covered those early Apollo missions, correct?
Yeah, well, and that was, again, just kind of lucky, because I lived here, and things were different back in 1969 for covering big news events. So there was no such thing as the internet or videotape, and you couldn't videotape something or use Zoom or the internet for anything and then just send it somewhere else. back then, if you filmed something, it was actually film. And to get that film, so the TV networks wanted to show that on national TV. And we had, if they filmed it in Houston, you had to get that film to New York. And so anyway, again, I got the job because a connection with my mother, and they needed someone. They just called me a gopher. Go for this, go for that. My main job was twice a day to drive to the airport, Houston Airport, and drop off that film on a plane to fly to New York, so the TV networks could show it on TV. And so they rented me. So I'm like 16, 17 years old. They rented me a new car, and again, twice a day, I made about that 100-mile round trip to Houston Intercontinental Airport to drop the film off. And I got to do other things, during the day too, that they needed, just random things they needed someone to do. A few times there was a guest speaker who was flying into Houston, and they asked me to, basically be the chauffeur to go to pick him up at the airport and bring him to the Johnson Space Center. Back then it was called the Manned Spacecraft Center, but today it's the Johnson Space Center. But I can tell you my favorite story about working for the TV networks. And so I wasn't a journalist, even though I worked for the TV networks. I was just a do whatever they needed done kind of person. But so my favorite story was, so Apollo 12, it was in November of 1969. And so the Apollo 11 crew, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, had already flown there and landed and walked on the moon and come back. And Apollo 12 was the second crew, about 4 months later. And so they wanted some film of Pete Conrad's family watching on TV, because they were at home as the Apollo 12 mission ended and their capsule splashed down into the Pacific Ocean. And so they sent me with a cameraman to Pete Conrad's house. So I was standing in Pete Conrad's living room with his family, watching on TV when the Apollo 12 capsule splashed down into the Pacific Ocean. And I remember that whole day like it was yesterday.
Wow.
I even remember the cameraman taking the camera out of the film and putting it into a canister, handing it to me. I drove back to across the street from the Space Center. There was a helicopter waiting for me. They were in some,
Wow.
and so this was a local human interest story. It wasn't national news. They just wanted, again, film of the family watching on TV. And so it just needed to get to a local TV station. It didn't have to go to New York, but they were in such a hurry to get it there because it was late in the afternoon and they wanted to show it on evening news, that they had this helicopter waiting for me. And I'd never been in a helicopter. And so I remember that helicopter ride too. The helicopter pilot had just come back from flying missions in Vietnam, so he was just zooming down the freeway to get me downtown to that TV station, and I'm just holding on like, gosh, he's acting like there's people shooting at us, It was quite a day, but yeah, I have a few pretty good stories from back in those Apollo days.
Wow. And that was just to get that footage to where it needed to go so that it could be on the nightly news?
Yeah, yes. It was just a canister of film. And the funny thing about that is, looking back on it, and this was 51 years ago now, I was so amped up and so much adrenaline. Again, like I said, 51 years ago, and I remember all of that leading up to that like it was yesterday. I could draw you a picture of Pete Conrad's living room and where the sofa was and where the TV was and where I was standing. But I remember walking into the TV studio, the building there, the station, and there was a desk over to the right, and there was a woman waiting for me. She knew I was coming, and I remember handing her the film. And then I don't remember anything after that. It was like, it's done. in my mind, I don't even remember the helicopter ride back to Houston.
Oh, you were probably just completely like adrenaline
Oh
and
yeah,
everything like
yeah.
that.
It's
Wow.
amazing. Yeah.
Well, tell us, like, from that moment, then somehow you captured the attention of NASA. Then you worked with International Space Station stuff. You did procurement. Tell kids a bit about what that kind of title means.
Yeah. So again, going back to uh, starting. So again, yeah, I was working for a TV, even though I was on site at NASA, and I have photos. They would set up basically a trailer, a mobile home on site at the Johnson Space Center, and set it up as a studio where they would interview the astronauts and flight directors and such. And so uh, I took pictures of my mother with Alan Shepard and Pete Conrad and a few of the other Apollo astronauts. I didn't get any photos of myself with them back then. But anyway, I was not working for NASA there at the time, and so I went away to college at the University of Texas again to study business. And even again, having grown up with NASA, it didn't really occur to me that I could work there, professionally. And so it wasn't until I was like a junior or a senior that I thought, well, wait a minute, you know, NASA doesn't employ just astronauts and scientists and engineers. They need other people too. So way back then, the way you got a job with the government was different. You had to take a test, and they had civil service employment tests. And there was one called the PACE, P-A-C-E, Professional and Administrative Career Examination. And you took this test, and apparently, from what I heard, it was really hard. If you scored, they gave you 6 scores in different categories. The things that if you ranked high in a certain one, it meant that maybe that was the kind of job that you would be good at. Certain skills, 6 different skill categories. And if you scored less than 70, they didn't tell you what your score was. You just failed. So
Ah,
anyway, I took the test and I made 4 100s and 2 98s. And so the way it worked was when you took the test, the government put your name on a list and sent that list to government agencies in the areas that you said you wanted to work. And so I said, I'd like to work at a government agency in Houston. It didn't really occur to me that it might be NASA who called me. And so sure enough, soon after taking the test, they sent me a letter and said, hey, would you like to come to Houston and interview for a job? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, can I be there today? So anyway, I came down for Houston. It turned out that the guy I interviewed with was the father of one of my friends in high school, and so I got a job, and 42 years later, living happily ever after. And so, yeah, I do want to say that I feel really lucky. Not everybody has a job that they love and they get up in the morning and actually look forward to going to it. And I did. And of course, yeah, it wasn't you know roses and fun every single day. There were tough times and hard work and frustrations and things like that. But still, I can't imagine another job I would have had anywhere in the world that I loved more than what I did for NASA for all those years.
it's
And
just when I hear these kinds of stories, first of all, uh, everybody who's like students and everybody who's listening, this guy had done his homework. He was a great student and apparently super bright, might I add. However, relationships are very meaningful. It's like when I talk to you guys sometimes about being part of that good people network, because it sounds like what I'm hearing from you, there are a few things. You had grown-ups, your parents, that encouraged you to, and your mom seems like she was pushing you in the direction of things that you
the first
love.
person in my family to go to college.
Oh, I was the same. I was the same. And I don't know for those online that you might be second or third generation to go to college, but you might be the first that is still, but that was because of a lot of the encouragement it sounds like you got along the way. And
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, and I'm sorry. And so again, the community I grew up in, as it turned out, once they built and opened NASA, was very professional, engineers and scientists and astronauts and doctors, and not everyone, but that was a huge part of the community I grew up in. And so they expected you to do good things and go to college and be a good person and have a responsible job and all of those things. And so again, I think I've always thought, that the people you spend time with and the people that are your friends can help either do good things for your life or bad things for your life.
I could not have said or wanted that communicated any better. So I'm always encouraging these guys, thinking about even in their little small space family they have here in this class, they may be the future leaders in space exploration. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you would do. Like if you had to go and procure something,
Yeah,
you're like, if you get the
yeah,
contracts and you're
yeah,
like, what am I going to send
yeah,
to the space station, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, great. So the first, I started working for NASA in 1975, and so that was 6 years before the first shuttle flight. But one of the first programs I started working on, because they had already started designing and developing and issuing contracts for help to build the space shuttle and the external tank and the solid rocket boosters and the main engines. Those were all separate contracts. But we had a contract with a company called Rockwell. It's later become part of Boeing to build the space shuttle orbiters. And yeah, so I still have, uh, if you can see, Rockwell. Well, it's backwards, but again, one of the first contracts, and I have a copy of a contract here. This, so contracts can be hundreds of pages long, and a lot of it is just what we call the boilerplate, just standard language that the law forced you to put into all kinds of contracts. When you buy a house, you have to sign 50 pieces of paper. But basically what a contract says is it's an agreement between two parties, NASA and Rockwell. And it says, the contract says what you're going to build for us, how much we're going to pay you for it when you're done, and when it has to be ready. And so again, I one of the first contracts I got to work on was the contract with Rockwell to build the Space Shuttle Orbiter vehicles. And again, there was a separate contract to build the solid rocket boosters, a separate contract to build the external tank, and a separate contract to build, it's kind of hard to see, the main engines. Those were all separate contracts. But I basically got to buy space shuttle orbiters when I was, just still a new guy at NASA. And so they call. I have a few interesting facts about that. So they cost about $2 billion each. The contract I worked on was valued at $16 billion. And of course, that was just at one point. It kept growing larger and larger. After we lost the Challenger, we needed another new orbiter, and so they built another one for another $2 billion. But so that and so these were built in California, and so again, part of that job and working in the procurement office was monitoring, administering the contract, making sure they were, submitting reports to us every month saying what kind of progress they were making, how much money they were spending, what kind of problems they were having. And actually the most interesting part about it, which most people don't think about, is they were constantly changing the design, just over and over and over and over. So they call them contract changes, and so whenever the engineer said, oh, I need you to change this, and so we would, the procurement office would issue a change, a signed piece of paper document saying, okay, we're changing the contract, and now, here are the provisions. Might change the cost. It almost always changed the cost. It went up, and maybe we might extend the schedule. If it was something that was fairly significant, and might even change something else. But so then we had to have a negotiation for exactly how much the cost was going to increase, and so that was a whole separate activity, and we got, at one point we got behind. They were just changing so many changes so fast that to do those negotiation, for this change and this change and this change, we had like literally hundreds of them. And so I remember one time they gave me responsibility for 30 different changes, and I just lumped them all together into one big negotiation and just negotiated what we call the bottom line, rather than trying to agree on a special amount for all 30 different changes. We just said, okay, look, here's what I think the value is for all 30 of them all put together. Let's just take care of all 30 of them at once. All right. And it worked.
You know what? Tapa Swinny has a great question. She's from India, and it goes to this point exactly. Tapa Swinny, do you want to ask your question?
Good morning. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to see Mr. Herb Baker here today, because he's one of my role models. And my question for him is, what skills, according to you, would we need to become a good negotiator?
So, thank goodness, at least, so that was back in, actually, I was going to say that was the early days of computers. I was going to say having a spreadsheet, sure did help. But actually, thinking back, we didn't get computers at NASA until 1984. So my first 9 years there, we didn't have computers. And so I'll answer your question in a minute, but we literally cut and paste. I mean, they use the term cut and paste in computers today, but we literally, if we had a document and we wanted to change it, we would maybe type a new one and then cut out the new stuff and paste it over the old stuff. But to go more back towards your question, so being good with numbers is something that is, I would say, very important. And I just happen to be, luckily, always able to kind of manipulate numbers and, pretty good with math in my head, because when you're negotiating something like that, you're constantly throwing numbers around and having to adjust, and you give them a number and then they give you a number, and they'll say, well, this is too high and that's too low and this is too high. And so you're having to, agree or not agree and adjust it and then add it all back together. And so being, good at math, or at least being able to, work numbers in your head is certainly a good thing to be good at. But you also have to have some level of understanding, the technical aspect of it too. You don't have to be an engineer. Of course I wasn't, but what you're doing, at least in the kind of situations I described, was you're talking with someone about how much it costs to do some engineering work. And so, if you know absolutely nothing about the project or what you're negotiating or what's being done, then you have no idea. If they tell you, well, it's going to take, 10 people 6 months to do this, when in fact it only should take 5 people 3 weeks to do it. But that's the kind of thing you can learn as you grow. Again, I didn't take engineering classes in college, but if you take a job where you're doing things like negotiating things like that, you at least at NASA, they give you an opportunity to develop that kind of knowledge and skill along the way before they put you in a situation where you have to be responsible for doing something like that.
Those are the kinds of things, guys, that again requires all your skills. It requires, and I would dare say, Herb, that you being a good, pleasant, kind human being also goes a far way in negotiating with people. Again, you want things to work, so becoming combative is not always. Sometimes you have to be strong, I'm sure, when you're like, come on, guys, let's be serious here. But I'm sure that also you found ways to be friends and find common ground, and those kinds of things are a great part of negotiation as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things I talk about when people say, what's changed in 50 years at NASA. And I still have a book, it's on my bookshelf, that they gave us when I was learning how to do this, and was hired at NASA to be work in the procurement office, and negotiating is a big part of that. And the book is basically ways to manipulate or trick the other side, or not so much the things that you should do, but things that they might do that you have to watch out for. And so back then it was much, much different, much more, confrontational, and you have to win, and over, and they have to lose. And it's changed drastically in 40 years. And even, I would say, I've been retired for 3 years now, but 10, 15 years ago, I would say probably it really started getting to the point where you're trying to have a win-win situation. Exactly, where, you get what you want and they get what they want and everybody's happy, rather than, I just, made him pay $1 million more than he should have, kind of thing, which is what they used to be proud of, and it's not like that anymore. Again, much more, as you kind of described, you need to protect your interest and get what you want and need, but you need to try to help the other person get what they want and need too, so that you both come out ahead in the end. And yeah, being a nice person, for lack of a better way to put it, is can help that.
Well, and it's like, I remember a good mentor of mine telling me one time, saying, it's like, are you going to play to win or playing not to lose? And when you're playing not to lose, that's usually when there's manipulation and other things going on. But when you're playing to win, and that both sides can achieve that win, there can be a lot of really great things. Tell me, maybe the most bizarre or funny, or maybe the most weird thing you ever had to procure or get a contract for. Was there anything that you thought was out of the ordinary, that you go, that might, just for dinner conversation, that you go, that was an interesting contract I had to negotiate there?
I can think of one that I like to tell people about, that I'm kind of proud of. In fact, it not that it was that odd or weird or strange. In fact, today, September 30th, is the anniversary. So the last big thing I did before I retired was, so I supported the astronaut office. And back then, so 3 or 4 years ago, things are changing now. Thank goodness, SpaceX and hopefully Boeing soon will be flying our astronauts back and forth to the space station. But back then, we had to depend on the Russians to get us there and back. And so they would land in Kazakhstan and Russia. And so we had a Gulfstream 3 airplane that we would fly to Kazakhstan and the astronauts would get on it and fly back to Houston. But the plane was, old, and it didn't have a very long range. And so it had to make multiple stops along the way. And so there were, not only did the astronauts want to get home, there were science, experiments on board too, that sometimes were time critical getting back, home out of an airplane. And so, again, one of the last things they assigned for me to do was to buy another airplane, a bigger, faster, better, newer airplane, so our astronauts would have a better trip back home. And I kind of chuckle at that because, again, this was 2016, just before the election, and a few months before. And so no one, NASA, other than the used to be Dryden, it's now Armstrong Flight Research Center in California, NASA doesn't really fly or buy airplanes, especially the Johnson Space Center. So it had been like 15 years since we had bought an airplane. And most of the people who had done that were retired or gone. Thank goodness I had a woman who worked for me who actually was involved in that. So she had some recollection of kind of what it took to do it. Anyway, I'm making a long story out of this, but the director of flight operations. So this is the guy who's responsible. He's the head of the astronaut office works for him. The mission control works for him. Astronaut training works for him. The aircraft operations works for him. And so he was, basically the number one person responsible for getting this airplane. And so he told me that he wanted me to be the source selection official, which meant I would choose which airplane. We would have a competition, and I would choose which airplane we bought. And I'm thinking, really, you want me to do that? But the interesting thing about it was that we had set a schedule, and so we had planned to, thinking how long it's going to take to do all of these things. We told him we could have the plane bought by February of 2017. And he said, oh, no, there's an election coming up in November, and, the government fiscal year ends on September 30th. And you have, if you don't have a new budget, which we rarely do and won't again this year, we have what they call a continuing resolution, where you just have to basically, you get the same amount of money you had before until you get your new budget. And so he would, anyway, all of that to say, he was worried that something might happen with the election or the budget. And so he said, I want you to have that plane bought and delivered by September 30th. And, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I'm going to just kind of, ease out into retirement and take it easy the last few months. And I thought, oh, wow. I don't know if we can do this or not. Well, sure as heck was going to try though. Right. So every Monday morning I went to his staff meeting, and he would go around the room, and the chief of the flight director's office would give a status, what happened in mission control that weekend. And the chief of the astronaut office was there, and there were a few astronauts in the room, and the head of the astronaut training would give update the status. And I would sit around the back of the room. And when he was done with all of those really important people, he would just go around the room and say, have anything to this morning, anything? And he would get to me. He wouldn't even let me say anything. He would just say, September 30th. No pressure at all, right? So anyway, again, to make a story that's already long, a little bit shorter, we did it. It was really, really lucky. Everything had to happen just exactly the way we wanted it to. I ended up buying what was a corporate jet for Nike that they sold to us. And it's funny, when you fold down the steps, it still had the Nike swoosh on the steps. But anyway, today, September 30th, 2016, we had a party at Ellington Field, the airport nearby where JSE keeps all of its aircraft. And Ellen Ochoa came out, and we had a cake and a big celebration, because we managed to get that airplane that the astronauts now, and we still have a few flying back and forth from Russia. So when an astronaut goes to lands in Russia and flies back to Houston, they fly on that airplane that I got to buy. And so I really enjoy. They usually have, you know, some video or photos of when the astronaut lands at Ellington, getting off the plane, and now they don't hug anymore, but unless they've been in quarantine, you know, some family members. But I get to say, hey, yeah, that's the airplane I bought. So anyway, that's one of my favorite procurement kind of stories.
That is amazing. Before I take questions from the kids, I have one last question. In your years, well, actually, probably two, in your years at NASA, who were some of your favorite kind of NASA like heroes or luminaries? And maybe they would be somebody that we have never even heard of, but that somebody that was particularly somebody you looked up to during your time there. And I'm sure you had plenty.
Yeah, yeah. So I will say, and still today, and he had already retired. Gene Kranz, the flight director who was on console, was basically the boss of mission control when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and of course was, you know, played in the movie. And here I got it's all in reverse, I think, but I have a an Apollo 11 flight plan. This is basically the real thing from 1969. And so I got to know Gene. I actually worked for one of his daughters. I spent 10 years at NASA headquarters. Anyway, I got him to autograph this for me. You know, failure is not an option. I've got something to say about that too in a second, but I spent 10 years at NASA headquarters, and when I came back, I moved back to Houston. I went to work in the space station program office, and my boss was a woman named Lucy Yates. And no one told me that her maiden name was Lucy Kranz. And so one day I walked into her office suite to talk with her, and her door was closed, and the secretary said, she's in there with her father. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll hang around for a couple of minutes, you know, maybe she'll be done. Anyway, the door opened and Gene Kranz walked out, and I'm like, that's your father? So he's still, and he lives just a few miles from me. So he's still very active, as you might know, in the area, and still, you know, speaks a lot and gets around a lot. He's like 88 years old. But interesting thing, you know, failure is not an option. I think, you know, he never said that. That was for the Apollo 13 movie. That was just a line created for the movie. And the interesting thing I wanted to say about that is, you know, it sounds great, and it's absolutely true. Certainly was true for him in the situation he was in, where, you know, lives were at stake. You fail and they die. So failure is not an option. But I also like to point out that the reverse of that to me is that failure is an option. You need to, if you're not failing at some things, you're not trying hard enough. You know, I'm sure you've heard that before, but I am a big believer in that. You know, I just you know, another thing is, you know, when I die, I want to regret the things I did, not the things I didn't do. And so again, I'm a big believer in, you know, whether you know you can do it or not, give it a try. And so that's really how I got into acting. Not to change the subject.
Oh yes, please, yes.
I was in I played trombone, so I was in the high school. I was president of the high school band, and I was in the Longhorn band at the University of Texas. And so one of my friends, NASA friends, one weekend, his wife was acting in a local theater show, and he asked me if I wanted to go. And so I went and just loved it, loved the theater and the show and everything about it. And so I thought, hey, how can I get involved in this? And so the next show was a musical, Jesus Christ Superstar. And so they said, well, hey, you know, you could play in the orchestra. And I thought, oh, cool. So that's what I did. I played in the orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar, and we were just off the stage. You know, it's kind of a small theater. And I would sit there every night. Sometimes the actors were just literally, an arm's length away from me. And after watching, 12 performances or whatever, I thought, I can do that. And I had never taken, I didn't take drama in high school. I didn't act in the senior play. I was in the orchestra. I never had an acting lesson. And I went to auditions, and of course I'm thinking, oh, wow, these people are pretty good, having second thoughts. But the show I auditioned for was Pippin, another musical, and I got a part, and boy, I had such a wonderful time doing it. So I've done like 16 shows now, musicals, comedies, drama, Shakespeare. I'm actually on the board of directors for our community theater now. And so we're kind of stuck not being able to perform for obvious reasons. But yeah, now that I'm retired and I have more time, I actually got out of it. I did like 12 or 13 shows, and I hope we have time. Another quick, interesting story about acting. I did like 12 or 13 shows back. This was in the early 80s, almost 40 years ago now. And about 2 or 3 years ago, again, after I retired, I thought, hey, I've got time to do that again. And, my sons were out of the house and, grown. And so I thought, well, let me, kind of ease back into it. Right. So I went to the local theater and told them, hey, what can I do? And I said, well, we need someone to run the lights for this show. And so I was on the crew. The next musical, I was sitting in the booth running the lights for the show. And then it was getting close to Christmas, and Miracle on 34th Street was the Christmas show. And one of my good friends from the 80s was also, at the time, she was already on the board of directors and was directing shows there at the theater every once in a while. Anyway, and so I thought, I'm not ready to get back on stage yet, right? And so they had the auditions for Miracle on 34th Street, and apparently no one auditioned for Kris Kringle, the Santa Claus part. And so she called me and said, hey, they need a Kris Kringle, you would be perfect for that. And I'm like, whoa. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I haven't done anything on stage in literally 34 years. And so again, the temptation was just too good. And so again, even though I was a little, anxious about it, I thought I'm going to do it anyway. And so sure, I did it, and I loved it. It was great, and hardly messed up a line the entire run of performances. And so now I've done about 4 shows since then, and I'd forgotten how much I loved performing on stage.
You know what? I so love that. The last show that my husband and I saw was back at the end of February when they had a touring company doing Jesus Christ Superstar. We were really excited about the next performance that was going to come, but I feel the same way. Normally in any given year, I'm out touring my Janet's Planet live show, and it's a kind of a one-woman show about the solar system. So there's nothing quite like connecting with an audience. Have you ever thought about doing TV? You said you've done some TV or commercials or things.
Well, not seriously. I mean, I have actually I've done 2 commercials, and I was actually in a TV show. They filmed, what did they call it?
A pilot?
Miniseries or something like that. It was a James Missioner's Space, a TV, like 4 or 5 episodes. And they were they offered NASA people roles. And so so I got to play an aircraft technician. And I didn't have any lines, but I was actually on TV.
That's fantastic.
And actually I did, believe it or not, I call it a modeling gig. So I joined up with this, I forget what it's called now, some on-site, or not on-site, online group that backstage that publishes opportunities for acting and commercials and even modeling, I guess. And so someone they contacted me, and I thought it was a commercial, an acting kind of thing, but it turned out to be just a photo shoot. There was no acting, no lines. It was just photos. As you can guess, the people kidding me about it. It was for a retirement home, but still. So I'm featured, like 10 photos of me in this the brochure, the printed media for this retirement home. I say I'm a professional model now because they paid me to just take pictures of me.
That is so fantastic. And I know we've got several questions that are coming in the chat, and I see some kids' hands raised. I think let's close out with one last thought, maybe something that before we ask the questions, something that you want to make sure the students and anyone listening or who may watch this later, that you would tell them about following all of your passions, not just one, but again, what I love about this is there's a nexus of a love of theater and art and science and math and all of these things. What would you say to any of the kids right now here, and what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, and so again, I guess I might think I've already said it, but I would repeat it again: is don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to fail. One of the things I love about I have two sons. My older one, and I don't know, maybe he seemed to kind of inherit it from me. He was not afraid to try anything. Didn't matter whether he was good at it or not, had ever done it before. If it was something he wanted to do, he just did it. Skydive, whatever. When he's a smart kid, really good, finished tied for number one in his class in high school. And so when he was applying for college, he picked out, several schools, and he said, well, I'd kind of like, and so we did some tours of some of the colleges. And so he was kind of a science, engineering, math kind of guy. And so we toured MIT. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know. You sure, boy, it's really hard to get into MIT. And he said, no, that's where I want to go. And so he applied and he was accepted, early admission. And I thought, wow, good for you. I mean, even the way I feel, if it were me, I might have thought, oh, I've got no chance to get picked there. I would have just applied somewhere else. I also remember, and he's not a big guy. He's, kind of average height like me. He's like 5'9" or so. And he was not a great basketball player, but he played, basketball. And so he tried out for the high school basketball team. And I'm like, really? And, he didn't make it, but he made it, like past the first or second, round of eliminations. And I thought, wow, good for you. And so now he's a professional software engineer in Boston, and again, I think he's as successful as he's been just because he's not afraid to fail. He's willing to try anything. If there's something he wants, he goes for it. And boy, that's what I would say. That's the way you should live your life.
Oh, without a doubt, it's like, I mean, you won't know unless you try. So give a good whirl, and, sitting where you're in your comfort zone. And if it's basically, I read a little post last night. It's like, just stay there, consistent enough kinds of like circumstances. It doesn't exactly push you to go and try. So if it makes you feel a little bit, like those butterflies are rumbling in your stomach, it's probably something that you should at least give yourself the opportunity to do. We've got a couple of thoughts. So kids, I'm going to go to a gallery view now. And so Bree, do you want to share with him what you put in the, and Abby, I'm coming to you. I'm going to get to a few of the things that people have sent me, but I do see your hand. And Bree, do you want to share with him the comment you put in there, or shall I? You want to unmute?
Which one?
about that you remember when he came to Alabama?
No, when you came. I remember
Oh,
when you came to the Space and Rocket Center.
well, I bet Mr. Herb has also been there to speak several times. And Tapa Swinney, unmute. You had two questions, one about a poster and one about his Medal of Honor for exceptional service. You want to ask those?
So my question was, I see the Return of Jedi poster behind you. So are you a Star Wars fan?
Yes, and actually, this is my younger son's room. He has better Wi-Fi connection in here than me, so I come in here to do Zooms. But yeah, I remember seeing the very first Star Wars movie when it first came out of the theaters. What was that, 1972 or something like
It was
that?
around 19, I will say it was around 1977, 78, because I was in fifth.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was later. I knew it was in the 70s, but I was thinking it was earlier. But yeah, yeah. And so obviously I've seen and I have them all on DVD, and I've watched them all multiple times. And in fact, it's funny because people talk about Star Wars and Star Trek, and well, which one do you like and which one's better? And I hope there's no Trekkies on here, but for me, Star Wars is by far my favorite over Star Trek.
And what is your second question, Tapa Swinney? And then Dharma, we're coming to you. Then Abby will come to you. Seth and William I see your hand, will come to you. So what's your second question, Tapa Swinney?
My second question is, how was it like to receive the NASA Exceptional Service Medal?
That was, I have to say, one of the proudest moments maybe in my life, and certainly in my career. I mean, NASA is such a wonderful, amazing place, so full of amazing, dedicated people who, have their heart set on accomplishing the mission and nothing else. And they'll, bend over backwards to help everyone, to help you, very collegial kind of thing. It's funny, over all those years, I would hear people talking about working in other places and other industries, and how, the competition and people stabbing each other in the back, trying to get promoted over the other person, and saying bad things about people. And boy, I just never saw any of that. I remember I used to think, the Space Center Houston is right next door. And so people would pay, $30 to go into Space Center Houston and ride a tram, just riding around, just looking at this place that I get to work where they're paying me, and so to think that someone there, thought I was deserving of a medal for exceptional service, just, it almost brings tears to my eyes.
You did great work and you supported great people, and we are all better for that, for sure. Dharma, you have a question as well. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, my dear?
Yes. How was it like working on the business side in NASA when I would say the most revolutionary time in space exploration? Well, one of them times.
It was great. In fact, again, that's actually another one of my favorite stories. I was actually involved in the activity that the very first time Elon Musk got involved with NASA. It was 2006. So that was 14 years ago. They had what they called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Project, and first, no one hardly knew anything about it. And so we sent out a request to companies to give us their ideas. It wasn't a normal procurement because we weren't buying something that we needed. It was just hey, we want to encourage industry to, start developing their own capabilities. And so give us your ideas. And, if we like it, we might give you some money, kind of thing. And so I was the business guy for that activity. And so I got to help evaluate the proposals and make the selection. And one of the companies we picked was SpaceX. I still have a copy of it was, in fact, it wasn't called a contract. It was called a Space Act agreement that Elon Musk signed, with his signature in 2006, the very first time NASA started working with commercial partners. And another interesting thing about that is a lot of people think, well, NASA doesn't like SpaceX and Boeing because they're competing, and no, absolutely not. I mean, that was our idea in the first place. We're giving them money to try to encourage them to build their own capabilities, so we could just buy the service and not have to, pay Russia for it. So anyway, I've been a big supporter and was heavily involved in the early days of that, and so I have fond memories of that too. I'm really happy that we NASA started that whole commercial development thing.
Beautiful. All right, Seth and William, I'm going to come to you, and then Abby, you're next. So what's your question down there from South Africa? You want to unmute there?
I just wanted to say I need to go now. So
Oh,
bye.
all right. Well, thank you. And I hope you were inspired. Thank you so much for waiting to tell me that. We will see you next time, my dear. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, Abby, what is your question? Oh no, we have this problem. It's about halfway through the Zoom meeting. We can't. Are you there?
Unmute. Yes, unmute. Please unmute.
No.
Oh dear.
Oh, if you can't do it, hon, just type your question in.
I think the wording, we could put a man on the moon, but unmuting our microphone.
There you go.
There you are.
The unmuting part was working. It's just my mouse is not wanting to go left or up. So I couldn't hit confirm. Like I couldn't hit unmute myself, and I couldn't go hit the mute button, the microphone button at the bottom of the screen.
Those things happen. What's your question for Mr. Baker?
What was the play and theater called that you acted in?
The first one, you said it was Pippin, right? The first one that you did?
Yes, that was the first show that I acted on stage in. Yes, Pippin.
That's a great one. Niara is going to be a future pilot. So Niara, do you have any questions for Mr. Baker?
And what was the I don't think so.
Okay. So what's your other question, Abby?
And what was the theater called?
Oh, it's a theater down in what's that community theater you perform at?
Well, so that one was at in Texas City, which is about, I'm just south of Houston, and it's about 30 miles from Galveston, and so a little town called Texas City, about halfway between Houston and Galveston, has a little community college called College of the Mainland, and they have a theater, really probably one of the nicest community theaters in the whole area. And so it's College of the Mainland Community Theater.
Awesome.
And is there where is that's the one where you play Chris Kringle?
Oh, where did you play Chris Kringle? Was that at the same place?
Oh, okay. Chris Kringle I did at a different theater. It's just it was called Clear Creek Community Theater. It's right across the street from NASA. If you walked out of the front door of the theater, you could see the Johnson Space Center.
Fantastic.
And what was the one where Chris Kringle?
That was the one, the Clear Creek Community Theater. The play was called goodness, I just flew out of my brain with Chris Kringle there. Miracle on 34th Street.
Yes. Nice.
That's the theater I'm on the board of directors for, Clear Creek Community Theater.
Guys, I feel so honored. Herb, thank you so much. And again, thank you for your service. What you have to know, guys, if you happen to be old enough yet to have an Instagram account, you can follow him there. He still does a lot of outreach and stuff. He supports our good friends like Sophie Crowder. Again, he supports so many, and I know him to be, I've heard him through Space Hipsters and other places. I bet if you ever had a real question and you wanted to reach out, he's the kind of guy that would be happy to follow up with you. I don't mean to volunteer you for that, but it appears that you're that kind of good soul.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to, join me on Instagram and send me a private message.
Awesome. All right, Wyatt, you've got a question. Abby will come to you next, but let's get Wyatt.
I have to leave soon because I have a video, like a school video I have to watch.
Okay, well, you go right ahead and we will see you later. Thank you guys for being here. Abby, what was your last question for Mr. Herb? And then we are going to sign off and say thank you.
Facebook.
He does have Facebook, Herb Baker, and you can find him there as well. And guys, again, here are the lessons we learned today. Failure is an option. In fact, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. I love that quote. And also do things that maybe you're going, here's the thing. I am not a very good, I can't draw very well or do artist. I always feel a little like, oh, that is not my great skill, but I love to doodle and I love to color. And it's like yesterday, after all of the origami we've been learning, I bought myself an origami kit. So always, yeah, it's like I thought, Artemis and Herb, I don't know, you probably do know Artemis Westenberg. She was president of Explore Mars a while. Now she's president emerita, now CEO of Explore Mars Europe. And again, my fellow compatriot in offering these classes. She might sometimes invite you to talk to her students in Europe sometime. So again, can everybody unmute and say a big thank you to Mr. Herb, and we will bid you a good day, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your great words. Everybody say thank you.
Thank you.
Think
about it.
Thank you.